The Apache women's offer. We'll give your baby milk, but marry one of us. Their small wagon creaked with every bump in the uneven trail, carrying little more than a few sacks of flour, a jar of dried beans, and a thin blanket rolled carefully to protect their infant son, Samuel. The boy was only a few months old, fragile and quiet most of the time, but today he fussed incessantly, his small cries piercing the still air. Thomas's brow was damp with sweat, and Mary's hands shook as she tried to soothe him. Water was their most urgent concern. They had been rationing what little they had for days, drinking sparingly and hoping the next spring they found would be enough to sustain them. The earth beneath their boots was cracked and hard, and the wind carried the sharp scent of dry grass and dust. Even the birds seemed scarce, as though the desert itself had retreated from the relentless heat. Mary leaned over Samuel, whispering soft words in his tiny ears, trying to calm him. "Shh, little one, just a little further. We'll find water soon, I promise." But even as she spoke, a pang of fear struck her chest. She had seen too many stories of families who hadn't made it this far, of infants who cried themselves to weakness in the unforgiving heat. Thomas steered the wagon with a determined yet weary hand. His face, tanned and weathered from years of outdoor labor, was drawn tight with worry. Every so often, he paused to wipe the sweat from his eyes and glance toward the distant hills, hoping for any sign of a spring or a stream. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders more heavily than the wagon itself. If Samuel did not survive, neither of them would forgive themselves. Hours passed under the blazing sun. The ground shimmered with heat, and the wagon wheels left faint tracks in the sand. Samuel's cries grew louder, more urgent, as though he could sense the danger before his parents could. Mary tried to breastfeed him, but her own strength was waning, and her milk had begun to dry up from exhaustion and dehydration. The baby's small lips were chapped, and his tiny hands curled into fists as if struggling against the heat itself. Just as despair began to settle in, Thomas spotted a movement in the distance. At first, it seemed like a trick of the sun on the horizon, a shimmer of heat and dust, but as they approached, the shapes became clear. A group of women appeared, walking with an ease and confidence that surprised Thomas. They were unlike anyone he had ever seen, strong, poised, and graceful despite the harsh landscape around them. Their skin was bronzed by the sun, their hair dark and flowing, and their eyes held a sharp intelligence, as if they could read the thoughts of anyone who crossed their path. Mary gasped quietly, unsure whether they should approach. The women were near enough now that Thomas could hear the gentle jingling of small ornaments they wore, the soft sound of their footsteps over the sand, and the hum of voices speaking in a language he could not understand. They seemed to move as a single unit, their eyes flicking to Samuel in the wagon as if they had been waiting for him. One of the women, slightly older than the others, stepped forward. She had a calm authority, and her gaze met Thomas's directly. Without words, she gestured toward the baby. Thomas's heart leaped. Could it be that they had come to help, or was this an encounter that would bring more danger? Thomas carefully pulled the wagon to a stop. He raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "Our child, he is very weak. We have no water, we don't know how to survive," he said in a voice hoarse from days of travel and shouting over the wind. He hoped they could understand him. The woman tilted her head slightly and then, with a gentle movement, beckoned them closer. Her hands were empty, open, showing no threat. Then slowly, she reached into a small leather pouch at her side and pulled out a clay cup. She filled it from a small spring nearby that Thomas had not noticed, a hidden trickle of clear, cool water. The woman offered it to him, her expression kind but firm, as though she expected him to accept without hesitation. Thomas handed the cup to Mary, who carefully helped Samuel drink. The baby's cries softened, turning into small gurgles of relief as water touched his parched lips. Mary's eyes filled with tears, and Thomas let out a long sigh, feeling some of the tension in his shoulders ease. Then came the part that startled them most. The woman spoke, this time more slowly, as if trying to bridge the gap between their worlds. Thomas could catch only a few words, but the meaning was clear. She was offering help, but it came with a condition. Samuel would be nourished, kept safe, and watched over, but Thomas or Mary would need to agree to a bond with their community. It was a proposal that seemed almost impossible to fathom. Mary stared at the woman, her mind spinning. How could she consider such a thing? Their society, their families back home, the promises of the life they had built, All of it seemed suddenly fragile, suspended in the desert heat. And yet, Samuel's tiny hand grasped for the cup, drinking eagerly. The need was urgent. Survival had become more important than pride. Thomas felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. He looked at the woman, and in her eyes he saw no malice, only determination and perhaps understanding. We would do anything for him," he said, his voice low but resolute. The woman nodded, satisfied with his words. Around her, the other women began to hum softly, a sound both comforting and powerful, echoing across the plain. Their voices seemed to wrap around the little family, offering warmth and safety even in the unforgiving desert. As the sun climbed higher, Thomas and Mary were guided to a small, shaded area near the spring, where they could rest and allow Samuel to drink his fill. The women worked with gentle hands, adjusting the baby's blanket, offering food they had prepared, and speaking quietly in their own language. Even though Thomas and Mary could not understand every word, the tone conveyed care and protection. Hours passed, and as the baby slept peacefully for the first time in days, Thomas and Mary finally allowed themselves a moment to breathe. The tension in their shoulders loosened, replaced by a cautious hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, they had found allies in this strange, harsh land. But beneath the relief, an undercurrent of anxiety remained. The offer from the Apache women was generous, but it was also profound. It would change their lives forever should they choose to accept it. The couple knew that the desert was not forgiving. It did not wait for the weak, nor did it offer second chances. Samuel's survival hung delicately in the balance, and the decision they faced was far larger than any they had imagined. As night fell, the desert cooled, and the sky became a canvas of stars. Thomas and Mary watched their son sleep in the safety of the women's care. They could hear the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a night bird, and the soft murmurs of the women nearby. It was a sound both alien and comforting, a rhythm that promised protection and strength. Mary reached over and took Thomas's hand. "We have no choice," she whispered. "If we want him to live, we have to trust them, even if it's difficult to understand." Thomas nodded, squeezing her hand tightly. "We have no choice," he repeated, "but maybe this is the way life wants us to go." In that moment, under the vast expanse of desert sky, the Fletchers felt the first stirrings of hope. The Apache women had offered more than water and care. They had offered a lifeline, a chance for their family to survive against impossible odds. And as Thomas and Mary watched the stars shimmer above them, they silently vowed to honor the trust placed in them, no matter where this path might lead. The desert night stretched on, quiet but alive with possibilities. Samuel slept peacefully, unaware that the decisions made tonight would shape the course of his life. And somewhere deep in the shadows, the Apache women watched, guardians of the child and witnesses to the choices that would soon bind two worlds together. Morning arrived slowly over the desert, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold. The air, cool after the chill of the night, carried the gentle scent of sand and distant vegetation. Thomas and Mary Fletcher stirred as the first light touched their faces, still tired but with a sense of cautious hope. Samuel lay in a small cradle made from woven reeds, sleeping peacefully, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. For the first time in days, the parents could rest a little, knowing that he was safe under the care of the Apache women. The women had been awake for hours already, moving gracefully around the small area near the spring. Their presence was quiet but commanding. They carried out tasks with calm efficiency, checking the flow of the spring, arranging food and water, and speaking in their soft, melodic language. Occasionally, they glanced toward Thomas and Mary, as if measuring their readiness to learn, to adapt, and to trust. Finally, the woman who had first approached them, the one with the quiet authority, walked toward the couple. She carried a small bowl filled with a soft, nourishing paste. "This is food for your son," she said slowly in broken English, pointing to the bowl and then to Samuel. Thomas and Mary exchanged a glance, grateful and overwhelmed. They had never seen food like this before, and yet the baby accepted it eagerly, his tiny mouth opening with instinctive hunger. Mary knelt beside Samuel, holding him carefully as the woman helped her feed him. The paste was warm and smooth, slightly sweet, and Thomas watched as his son's color returned to his cheeks. It was a miracle in their eyes, born not from their own hands, but from the generosity of people they barely knew. Once Samuel had eaten, the woman gestured for Thomas and Mary to follow her. She led them a short distance from the spring to a small cluster of shelters made from wooden frames, animal hides, and woven reeds. The structures were simple but sturdy, designed to provide protection from sun, wind, and occasional storms. Around them, the community seemed to wake with the day. Children laughed and ran in the open spaces, women worked together to prepare meals and care for the young, and men tended to small gardens or check traps set for game. Thomas and Mary could hardly believe what they were seeing. The Apache community was thriving in a land that the settlers often called harsh and unforgiving. Here, life had found a rhythm, a balance with the environment, and the Fletcher couple realized how little they truly understood about the desert before now. The woman who had guided them stopped near a fire pit and gestured for Thomas and Mary to sit. "We will teach you," she said slowly, her eyes calm but firm. "But first, you must understand our ways. You must learn respect. You must learn patience." Thomas nodded, understanding that survival required more than water and food. It required knowledge, cooperation, and humility. "We are ready," he said simply. Mary's hands tightened on Samuel's blanket, and she nodded as well, determination shining in her eyes. "We will do whatever it takes for him to live." The day passed with careful lessons. The women showed them how to carry water efficiently from the spring, how to prepare simple meals using ingredients found in the desert, and how to care for children in a land where danger could arrive without warning. At first, Thomas and Mary struggled. The tools were unfamiliar, the methods strange, and the rhythm of life so different from the routines they had known back home. But the women were patient, repeating instructions, demonstrating tasks, and encouraging them with quiet smiles. By midday, Samuel was awake again, his small cries drawing attention. Several women gathered around, offering him food and water. Mary observed them closely, noticing the gentle way they spoke to the child, the soft touch of their hands, and the understanding that seemed to guide every action. There was a calm authority in their care that made Mary's heart ache with gratitude. Here, her son was more than safe. He was nurtured, and slowly regaining the strength he had lost during the harsh journey. Thomas helped with the chores, learning how to prepare firewood and tend to the small animals kept near the shelters. He marveled at how each task was performed with intention, as though every movement held a purpose in sustaining life. The Fletchers began to see that survival was not just about water and food. It was about understanding a community, its values, and the ways in which people depended on each other. As the sun climbed higher, the couple noticed children approaching, curious and cautious. They watched Samuel with wide eyes, some reaching out to touch his blanket, others whispering to each other. One little girl about 5 or 6 tugged gently at Mary's sleeve, pointing toward Samuel and smiling. Mary laughed softly, feeling a warmth in her chest. It was strange and comforting, the sense of connection forming so quickly despite the differences in language and culture. Later, the woman with quiet authority returned, holding a small object in her hand. It was a necklace made of beads and small carved pieces of wood. She placed it around Samuel's neck and explained, with a few simple words and gestures, that it was meant to protect him. Thomas and Mary accepted the gift, overwhelmed by the kindness and symbolism. They realized that this was more than survival. It was an introduction to a way of life that valued community, care, and respect. As evening approached, the desert sky turned deep shades of orange and purple. Shadows stretched across the sand, and the temperature cooled. Thomas and Mary sat beside the fire pit, Samuel cradled in Mary's arms, feeling the warmth of the flames against their skin. The women began a quiet ritual, singing softly, their voices weaving through the night air in a melody that seemed to tell stories of generations past. It was a hauntingly beautiful sound, at once foreign and deeply soothing. Thomas felt a strange mixture of awe and humility. He had never imagined that help could come in this way, that survival could be so intertwined with respect and trust. Mary rested her head against his shoulder, listening to the voices and watching Samuel's small chest rise and fall. For the first time in weeks, they allowed themselves a moment of peace, knowing that tomorrow would bring new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities for connection. Before they went to sleep, the woman who had guided them spoke again, this time more clearly. "You must choose," she said gently. "Your son will live, but to be part of our ways, one must join fully, trust, respect, family." Thomas and Mary exchanged a glance, understanding the weight of her words. The offer was not just about survival. It was about becoming part of something larger than themselves, about honoring a community that had already given them life-saving care. They lay down near Samuel, listening to the quiet night and the distant rustle of the desert. Mary whispered, "Do you think we can do it?" Thomas squeezed her hand, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "We have no choice if we want him to live," he said. "But maybe we can learn more than survival. Maybe we can learn what it truly means to live." The night deepened, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. Somewhere beyond the flickering firelight, the Apache women continued their watch, guardians of a fragile life and witnesses to the choices that would shape the future. Thomas and Mary drifted into a tentative sleep, hearts heavy with the responsibility of tomorrow, but lightened by the hope that Samuel would survive, grow, and thrive. In the quiet of the desert night, lessons of patience, respect, and community began to take root in the hearts of the Fletchers. They had crossed a threshold into a new world, one that demanded humility, courage, and openness. And though they did not yet fully understand the ways of the Apache, they knew one thing clearly. Samuel's life, fragile and precious, depended on the bond they were forming with the women who had chosen to help them. By the first light of dawn, the desert was alive with movement once more. Thomas and Mary rose, ready to continue learning, ready to embrace the responsibilities that lay ahead. The path would not be easy, but with the guidance of the Apache women, they began to see that survival could be more than endurance. It could be connection, trust, and the creation of a family in the truest sense. The following days passed with a rhythm Thomas and Mary had never experienced before. Each sunrise brought a mix of excitement and uncertainty. The Apache women continued to guide them patiently, showing them the ways of the desert, the traditions of their people, and the small rituals that kept the community thriving. It was a life so different from the one the Fletchers had known, yet it was beautiful in its harmony with the land. Thomas spent long hours learning to carry water efficiently, not just from the spring but from smaller hidden streams that appeared only during certain times of the day. He watched the women gather plants and herbs, learning which were safe to eat, which could be used for healing, and which were to be left untouched. The knowledge was vast and intricate, a reminder that survival in the desert required wisdom as much as courage. Mary, meanwhile, focused on Samuel. She learned how to bathe him in small basins of warm water, how to make simple pastes and soups that would nourish him, and how to soothe him when he cried. The women taught her to observe the subtle signs of hunger, fatigue, or discomfort in a child, and Mary marveled at their attentiveness. Each action, each gentle touch, seemed to communicate love and respect simultaneously, but the lessons were not only practical. Thomas and Mary began to notice that the Apache had a way of communicating without words, of reading each other's intentions and emotions with a clarity that seemed almost magical. Small gestures, a hand on a shoulder, a tilt of the head, a quiet look, conveyed understanding in ways that the Fletchers had never imagined. It was humbling and at times overwhelming to realize how much they did not know. One morning, as the sun rose slowly over the desert, Thomas helped the women tend a small garden near the edge of the settlement. Rows of corn, beans, and squash had been carefully planted, and the soil had been turned and fertilized with care. The women moved gracefully among the plants, checking for signs of pests, dryness, or disease. Thomas followed their instructions, watering and adjusting the soil, feeling both clumsy and determined. A young girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, approached him cautiously, holding a small woven basket of herbs. She offered it to him with a shy smile. Thomas accepted, grateful for the gesture, and realized that the children, too, were teachers in their own way. They moved freely among the adults, helping, observing, and learning the skills that would sustain them throughout their lives. Meanwhile, Mary was with Samuel near the spring. She had begun to understand the rhythms of the day, when the water was freshest, when the sun was at its strongest, and when Samuel was most likely to eat or sleep. The baby had gained weight and color, his small cries now soft whimpers rather than the desperate cries of days past. Mary's heart swelled with relief, but she also felt the weight of gratitude and responsibility. The Apache women had saved her child's life, and in doing so had placed a challenge before her, to trust, to learn, and perhaps to change. Yet not everything was simple. There were moments of tension, moments when the differences between the Fletchers' world and the Apache world became painfully clear. Thomas struggled with the strict routines of the day, the careful preparation of food, and the precise attention to detail required in every task. He had been used to a life of freedom and improvisation, but here, mistakes could cost more than time. They could cost safety, resources, or trust. Mary, too, faced challenges. The rituals surrounding care for children, the way the community spoke to one another, and the unspoken rules of respect and hierarchy were complex. At first, she hesitated, unsure if her actions would be seen as respectful or intrusive. One evening, she accidentally picked up an object without asking, a small carved piece of wood that was meant for ceremonial purposes. The older woman who noticed approached her calmly but with a serious expression, and Mary felt a wave of embarrassment and fear. The woman spoke gently, using a combination of broken English and gestures. "Respect, ask first, learn." Mary nodded quickly, feeling the lesson sink in. She realized that survival here was not just about food, water, or shelter. It was about understanding the values and traditions that had sustained this community for generations. Mistakes were inevitable, but humility, attentiveness, and willingness to learn were essential. As the week progressed, Thomas and Mary began to feel more confident. They could carry water without spilling it, prepare simple meals, and care for Samuel with the guidance of the women. They began to notice small improvements in their own understanding of the community, how the women worked together, how the children learned through observation, and how the men contributed in quiet but essential ways. They saw that every task, every gesture had a purpose, and slowly they began to appreciate the wisdom behind it. One afternoon, Thomas was called to help with a larger task. The community needed to repair a section of the shelter that had been weakened by wind. The work required careful planning, cooperation, and trust. Thomas found himself working alongside men and women, following instructions and learning not just how to build, but how to communicate, how to anticipate needs, and how to support others in a shared goal. It was exhausting, but deeply rewarding. Mary, meanwhile, helped teach Samuel about the small plants and herbs she had learned to identify. She held his tiny hands and let him touch the soft leaves, feeling his curiosity and wonder. The Apache women watched and occasionally guided her, correcting gently, encouraging her efforts, and celebrating the baby's progress. Mary felt a growing sense of belonging, a connection she had not expected to find so quickly. By evening, both Thomas and Mary were tired but satisfied. They gathered near the fire where Samuel slept peacefully in his cradle. The community began its evening routines, preparing simple meals, cleaning the area, and settling children for the night. The Fletchers observed quietly, understanding that these routines were more than habit. They were a foundation for life, stability, and trust. As the stars appeared in the sky, the woman who had guided them from the beginning approached once more. She spoke slowly, carefully choosing her words. "You learn fast, you see, you respect, but trust takes time, you must live with us. Learn, decide with heart." Thomas and Mary nodded, understanding the deeper meaning of her words. Their journey was far from over. They were still strangers in this world, still learning its rhythms, still proving their willingness to honor the life that had been saved. The night grew quiet, broken only by the soft sounds of the desert, wind moving over sand, distant animals, and the occasional call of a night bird. Thomas and Mary sat near the fire, reflecting on the lessons of the day. They had begun to understand the Apache women, their patience, their wisdom, and the gentle authority that guided the community. They had also begun to understand themselves, their strengths, their weaknesses, and the depths of love they felt for Samuel. Mary whispered, "Do you think we could ever truly belong here?" Thomas looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. "We may never fully belong in the way they do, but maybe we can belong enough. Maybe we can learn enough to honor what they've given us." "That has to be enough for now." The couple fell silent, letting the quiet of the desert night settle around them. Samuel stirred slightly in his sleep, reaching a tiny hand toward the firelight, and Thomas and Mary felt a renewed determination. Every lesson, every challenge, every moment of understanding brought them closer to the goal that mattered most: their son's survival, health, and future. Over the next few days, the Fletchers' confidence grew. They began to anticipate the needs of the community, to offer help without being asked, and to understand the subtle ways in which trust was built. They also began to form bonds with the children, who would watch, mimic, and eventually help them. It was a slow process, filled with small victories and minor setbacks, but each day brought progress. Thomas learned to see the desert not as a harsh, lifeless place, but as a world filled with patterns, resources, and possibilities. Mary learned to trust her instincts while respecting the guidance of those who had lived here all their lives. Samuel thrived, gaining strength and curiosity, and his presence became a quiet bridge between the Fletchers and the Apache community. And still, the weight of the offer remained in the background. The promise of life for Samuel had come with a choice that would eventually require courage, humility, and the willingness to embrace a world far different from the one they had known. For now, Thomas and Mary focused on learning, observing, and proving themselves. The day would come when the decision could no longer be delayed, but until then, survival, understanding, and trust were their only priorities. As the desert sun dipped below the horizon once more, Thomas and Mary sat beside the fire, Samuel sleeping safely in Mary's arms. The Apache women moved quietly around them, guardians of a fragile life and witnesses to the Fletchers' journey. The desert night was calm, yet alive with the promise of tomorrow, a promise of lessons yet to be learned, challenges yet to be faced, and bonds yet to be strengthened. In the quiet of the night, Thomas whispered to Mary, "We are learning more than survival. We are learning life. And maybe, just maybe, we will be ready for whatever comes next." Mary nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "We have no choice but to learn, and I will do anything for Samuel, anything." The wind carried a soft melody across the desert, a song of life, endurance, and hope. And in that melody, the Fletchers felt the first true sense of belonging. Not complete, not final, but enough to guide them toward the future together. The days passed, and the desert's rhythm became a part of Thomas and Mary's lives. They woke with the sun, worked with the community, and rested as evening fell. Samuel was thriving, his laughter filling the air and bringing smiles to the faces of the children and adults alike. The couple had learned much about the land, the people, and the wisdom that guided every action in the Apache community. Yet beneath the daily routines and the small victories, a weight lingered in their hearts, a choice they had to make, a decision that would shape the rest of their lives. Thomas found himself thinking about the offer constantly. The women had saved Samuel's life, nourished him, and taught them how to survive in ways they could never have imagined. But the promise came with a condition, one that required a deep commitment, a joining of lives beyond the ordinary bonds of friendship or gratitude. Thomas wrestled with the thought, feeling the tension between duty, love for his son, and the unfamiliar path being presented to him. Mary, too, felt the pressure of the decision. At night, she would cradle Samuel in her arms, watching him sleep peacefully, and her mind would wander to the offer. She had never considered marrying outside her culture, outside the familiar world she had known. Yet she could not deny the profound care and wisdom of the Apache women, or the bond that had begun to form between her family and the community. Every time she looked at Samuel, she felt the urgency of the choice pressing closer. One morning, the woman with quiet authority approached them with a gentle but firm presence. She held a small basket of herbs and fruit and gestured for them to sit. Thomas and Mary complied, their hearts heavy with the understanding that the moment to consider the offer had arrived. "You have learned much," she said, her voice calm and steady. "You have shown respect, patience, and care. Your son is strong, but the choice remains. To join our ways, one must give heart. One must live as part of the family. Will you do this?" Thomas swallowed hard. He looked at Mary, then at the woman, and finally down at Samuel, who babbled softly in his sleep. His mind raced, weighing every possible outcome. He thought of the life he had left behind, the society he knew, the expectations of family and friends far away. And then he thought of Samuel, his tiny, fragile life, and how the Apache women had nurtured him when he could not. Mary placed a hand on his arm, her eyes reflecting the same struggle he felt. "We cannot think of ourselves," she whispered. "We must think of Samuel. If this is the only way he can live fully, then we must consider it seriously." The woman nodded, acknowledging their thoughtfulness. She did not press further, allowing them the space to reflect. "Time is given, but not too long," she said. "The child must be safe and the family must decide." Thomas and Mary retreated to a quiet place near the spring, where they could speak freely. The babbling water and the gentle rustle of leaves created a calm atmosphere, giving them the clarity they desperately needed. "I never imagined it would come to this," Thomas said, his voice low. "I thought survival meant food and water, but it's more than that. It's trust, love, and a bond we cannot break. I don't know if I am ready for this, but I do know that Samuel cannot survive without it." Mary nodded, her fingers tracing patterns on the blanket that covered Samuel. "I feel the same," she said. "I have never been in a situation like this, but these people, they saved our son, they have given him life. How can we turn that away? How can we not honor their care?" The days that followed were filled with preparation, discussion, and quiet observation. Thomas and Mary watched the community more closely, noticing how the Apache women lived, how they supported one another, and how the men contributed. They saw the strength in the bonds that held the community together, and realized that joining this world would require more than agreement. It would require commitment, respect, and understanding. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Thomas and Mary sat near the fire, Samuel sleeping in Mary's arms. They had spoken at length, weighing their fears, hopes, and the possibilities of the future. Thomas finally broke the silence. "I think I am ready," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I am ready to do what it takes to protect Samuel, to honor these people, and to become part of this community. I do not know what life will be like, but I know this: I cannot turn away from the chance to give our son a life worth living." Mary's eyes filled with tears, and she squeezed his hand. "I am ready too," she said. "For Samuel, for us, for the future. It will be difficult, yes. But if we face it together, I believe we can find a way to honor both worlds." The next morning, the couple returned to the woman with quiet authority. They spoke with a clarity born of love and necessity. "We accept," Thomas said. "We will join your ways. We will live as part of your family, and we will honor the care you have given our son." The woman nodded slowly, a small smile crossing her face. "Your hearts are strong. Your son will thrive. You will learn and you will teach. Together, we are stronger." From that day forward, Thomas and Mary's lives changed in ways they could not have anticipated. They began to participate fully in the community's routines, learning everything from tending gardens to preparing meals, from caring for children to participating in small ceremonies that honored the land and the ancestors. They faced challenges, misunderstandings, language barriers, and the occasional moment of fear, but they also experienced triumphs, connection, and joy. Samuel thrived more than ever. He learned from the children, played freely under the watchful eyes of the women, and absorbed the rhythms of a community that valued care, respect, and shared responsibility. Thomas and Mary felt a sense of peace they had never known, a knowledge that they were doing everything possible to ensure their child's safety, happiness, and growth. The bond between the Fletchers and the Apache women grew stronger. Trust became a foundation, respect became a habit, and the once strange gestures of care now felt natural and essential. The couple discovered that the choice they had made was not just about survival. It was about love, family, and the courage to step into a world that was unfamiliar yet full of possibility. One afternoon, while gathering herbs near the spring, Thomas spoke with the woman who had first approached them. "I still feel as though I am learning every day," he said. "But I also feel accepted. Is that possible, that we could be truly part of your family?" The woman smiled gently. "Acceptance is earned through care, respect, and effort. You have shown all three. And so, yes, you are part of our family. Not fully yet, for that will take time, but the path is clear. You walk it with honesty and love. That is enough." Mary, listening nearby, felt tears prick her eyes. She had never imagined that life could take such a turn, that trust and courage could bring them not only survival but belonging. The desert, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a place of hope, learning, and growth. As the sun set and the community gathered near the fire for the evening meal, Thomas and Mary sat with Samuel between them, feeling the warmth of the flames and the rhythm of the people around them. The offer that had once seemed impossible, that had caused hesitation and fear, had become a bridge to a life they had never imagined. It was a choice of love, courage, and commitment, a choice that would guide them for years to come. The night was quiet, filled with the soft hum of conversation, the laughter of children, and the gentle sounds of the desert. Thomas looked at Mary and then at Samuel, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. They had faced uncertainty, fear, and moral challenge, and through it all they had found a path that honored life, love, and community. As they settled down to sleep beneath the stars, Thomas whispered, "We made the right choice." "Samuel's life, our life, it is better because of it." Mary nodded, her heart full. "Yes," she whispered, and we will continue to learn, to grow, and to honor the gift we have been given. In the quiet of the desert night, with their son safe and thriving, Thomas and Mary felt a peace they had never known. The choice had been difficult, the path uncertain, but their hearts were certain. They had accepted a new way of life, embraced a new community, and committed themselves fully to the survival and happiness of their child. And in doing so, they had discovered the true meaning of trust, courage, and love. The following months brought a rhythm of life that Thomas and Mary had never known before. The desert, once harsh and unforgiving, had become a home of lessons, connections, and hope. Samuel grew stronger each day, his laughter echoing across the small settlement, and his curiosity guiding him to explore the land under the careful watch of the Apache women. Every small milestone, the first time he helped gather herbs, the first time he attempted to imitate the children's games, the first time he spoke a few words in the Apache language, was celebrated with joy and quiet pride. Thomas found himself waking with the sun, no longer weighed down by fear or uncertainty, but by a sense of purpose. Each day was an opportunity to learn, to support the community, and to guide Samuel in a world that was new to him. The couple's integration into the community was slow but steady. They learned the importance of observation, watching the way the Apache women interacted, how the men contributed, and how the children learned not just through instruction but through imitation, curiosity, and play. Mary, too, found a rhythm in her days. She had learned to prepare meals that nourished both body and spirit, to weave simple baskets and cloth, and to care for Samuel with the knowledge and experience of women who had mastered life in the desert over generations. She found herself laughing more freely, relaxing into a routine that once would have seemed impossible. Yet beneath the comfort of routine, she knew that the bond they had formed with the community required constant attention, humility, and respect. The decision to accept the Apache women's offer had reshaped every aspect of their lives. Thomas and Mary were no longer strangers, no longer visitors merely surviving day by day. They were participants in a community that valued care, respect, and mutual support. Each action they took had meaning, and each choice carried weight. They learned that survival was not just about sustaining life, but about nurturing it, protecting it, and creating a foundation for the next generation. One day, as Thomas helped repair a shelter, he noticed a group of children watching him carefully. Among them was Samuel, now more confident, standing beside one of the Apache children who held his small hand. He watched Thomas with curiosity, mimicking his movements, asking questions in a mixture of words he had learned from both parents and community. Thomas felt a wave of pride. The child's growth was a testament not only to his survival, but to the wisdom, patience, and care of the women who had first extended a hand when life seemed impossible. Mary spent her afternoon near the spring, teaching Samuel how to identify edible plants and herbs. She demonstrated gently, letting him touch the leaves and feel the textures. The Apache women watched, occasionally offering guidance with a quiet smile. Mary realized that she was not just caring for her son, but becoming a part of a living tradition, one that valued observation, patience, and respect for all forms of life. As days turned into weeks, Thomas and Mary began to reflect more deeply on the choice they had made. They understood that the offer from the Apache women had been more than a practical solution to survival. It had been a test of character, of courage, and of love. Accepting it had required humility, a willingness to let go of pride and trust in the unknown. But the rewards had been immeasurable. Samuel was thriving, and they had gained a new understanding of family, community, and life itself. One evening, as the desert sky turned brilliant shades of orange and purple, Thomas and Mary sat with Samuel between them, watching the other families prepare for the night. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter, gentle conversations, and the occasional call of a desert bird. The community moved with a harmony that seemed effortless, each action purposeful and meaningful. Thomas leaned back, taking in the scene, and whispered to Mary, "We could never have imagined this life. It is harder than the one we knew, yes, but it is also richer, fuller, and more real. Samuel is alive, thriving, and learning from people who truly care." Mary nodded, her hand resting on Samuel's small shoulder. "It is strange to think how close we came to losing him, but the women gave us more than life. They gave us guidance, wisdom, and a family. We are part of something bigger now, and I feel it every day." The Apache woman who had first offered her hand approached, carrying a small basket of food. She smiled at the family, her eyes soft but strong. Your son grows, your hearts are true, you have learned, you have respected, and you have joined. This is the way of life. This is how we survive, how we live. Thomas bowed his head slightly, humbled by her words. We are grateful, he said simply. Every day we are grateful. We will continue to learn, to respect, and to protect what you have given us. Samuel's life, our life, is better because of your kindness and wisdom. The woman nodded, satisfied. She gestured to Samuel, who giggled and tried to stand, wobbling slightly on his tiny legs. The community laughed softly, and Thomas and Mary joined in, their hearts full. It was a moment of joy and connection, one that captured the essence of what they had gained. As the night deepened, Thomas and Mary sat quietly, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. They remembered the fear and desperation of their first days in the desert, the tears and uncertainty as Samuel cried from hunger and thirst, and the overwhelming relief when the Apache women had offered help. They understood now that life was more than endurance. It was trust, courage, love, and community. Samuel stirred in Mary's arms, reaching a tiny hand toward the firelight. Thomas smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace. Their child's life had been saved, yes, but more than that, he had been given a future filled with learning, connection, and love. And in that future, Thomas and Mary saw their own growth, their own transformation from frightened strangers to committed members of a community that had embraced them. Over the next few years, the Fletchers became inseparable from the community. They celebrated the changing seasons, participated in festivals, and learned the stories of the land and the ancestors who had walked it before. Samuel grew into a strong, curious, and compassionate boy, his personality shaped by both the love of his parents and the wisdom of the Apache women. Thomas and Mary continued to face challenges, of course. Life in the desert was never easy. There were storms, dry seasons, and times when food and water were scarce. But they faced each obstacle with the skills, knowledge, and resilience they had gained. They understood now that survival was not simply about endurance. It was about preparation, cooperation, and a deep respect for the land and the people around them. Mary often reflected on the moral and emotional journey they had undertaken. The choice to accept the Apache women's offer had required courage, humility, and the willingness to trust the unknown. It had been a decision that could not be reversed, yet it had brought rewards beyond their imagination. Samuel's life, their integration into a strong and supportive community, and a new understanding of what it meant to love and protect a family. Thomas, too, felt the depth of the transformation. He had learned to observe, to listen, and to respect the wisdom of others. He had learned patience, the importance of teaching through example, and the value of working together toward a shared goal. Most of all, he had learned that survival was never truly about one person. It was about the bonds formed, the care given, and the trust earned. One evening, as the desert cooled and the stars emerged in a brilliant display, Thomas and Mary sat together outside their shelter, Samuel asleep nearby. They watched the firelight flicker across the sand, and the shadows of the community moving in quiet harmony. Thomas spoke softly, his voice filled with emotion. "We have come so far," he said. "From fear and uncertainty to this life, this family, this future. I never thought survival could feel like this, so full of love, trust, and hope." Mary nodded, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It is more than survival," she whispered. "It is life, and we will honor it every day. Samuel's life, our life, is a gift, and we will never forget that." The desert night was peaceful, the wind carrying a soft melody through the air. The Fletchers had found their place, their purpose, and their family. The choice they had made, once so frightening, had become the foundation of a life filled with meaning and joy. They understood that the legacy of that choice would live on, not only in Samuel, but in the lessons, love, and wisdom they would pass on to him. As the night deepened, Thomas and Mary drifted into sleep, their hearts at peace. Samuel, safe and thriving, represented not just the miracle of survival, but the power of trust, courage, and love. The desert, once a place of fear, had become a home of hope, learning, and family. And in that home, the Fletchers discovered a truth that would guide them for the rest of their lives. That life, when nurtured with care, respect, and love, could overcome any challenge, bridge any difference, and create a legacy that would endure for generations. And so, under the vast, star-filled sky of the desert, the story of Thomas, Mary, and Samuel came full circle. What began as a desperate struggle for survival had blossomed into a life of belonging, connection, and purpose. The Apache women's offer, once daunting, had become the bridge to a new world, a world of care, love, and hope that would guide the family for the rest of their lives.